Thank you very much, Colette, and thank you all for staying this long for this third and best panel. Okay, you'll be the judge of this. I have to express my gratitude to Laura because she helps break this male monotony in this last panel. It was not intentional. Okay, so what we're going to do today, as Colette said, my team was leading the solutions work package of acting. There's been a lot of work that has been done. You heard about this a lot today. You heard about the pilots, the 10 pilots that were selected, and they did a really excellent job. And Daniel is going to talk to us about some lessons that we learned from the pilots. You can read about the pilots in the website, and you can find in the website all the work that we have done that has culminated in 13 fact sheets of policy recommendations that some of them are targeting policymakers, others are targeting business, others are targeting civil society, and others, all of them together. This last panel is dedicated to partnerships between these actors. And well, I'm going to give a brief presentation of some of the most relevant, let's say, policy recommendations, and then we can have a discussion with our panel. So before I give the floor to Daniel, I just introduce very briefly the panel so you know who they are. I'm starting from Edoardo Zanchini. Is that correct? Zanchini? Okay. Edoardo currently serves as the director of City of Rome Climate Office. From 2011 to 2012, he held the position of national vice president at the Italian environmental NGO Legambiente. He's an architect by profession, and he has a PhD in urban planning. He has also been a board member of Transport and Environment Renewables Grid Initiative. As I see, next is Gabriele Quinti from Knowledge and Innovation, one of the key partners, let's say, in the acting project. Gabriele is a senior researcher in knowledge and innovation in Rome. He is a socioeconomist and statistical methodologist. He has carried out numerous activities such as studies and research, institutional capacity building and evaluation on climate change, societal related issues, more specifically social issues related to energy transition, natural hazards management, and on the relations between state and society in fields like the promotion of good governance, the quality of social services, and migration dynamics. Thank you very much, Gabriele. And Laura Kaestele. Laura works at ECOLISE. She is a network weaver, designer, grower, project manager, and facilitator in integrative design, ecological regeneration, community and organizational development, permaculture, and holistic living, with more than 10 years of practical experience in eco-social field. And Esteban Pelayo. I'll leave Daniel for the last because he's the next speaker. Esteban, an old friend of mine, we work together in other projects as well. Thank you very much for being with us. He's an innovation manager. He's a manager of Science Park of Alicante. He's dynamizing the ecosystem of more than 30 high-tech companies that are linked to the University of Alicante. And from 2015 to 2022, where I met him, he was director of EURADA, the European Association of Development Agencies. So thank you all for being with us. We will have an interesting discussion, I think. And now I would like to give the floor to Daniel Botha from ICLEI to give us a presentation of the lessons that we learned from the pilot actions. Daniel, very briefly, is an urban planner with a background in the legal profession, currently working across a range of projects relating to sustainable urban development policies in general and the European Green Deal in particular. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nikos, and thanks everyone for being here today. Is this the clicker? Yeah. Okay. So just to give a brief introduction, my name is Daniel Botha. I work for ECLEI Europe. We're a network of cities and local governments working on sustainable development processes. So because of this, I think the topic of localizing the European Green Deal has been something that all our projects basically focus on this in different ways. Normally, in this case, it would be with cities and local governments. In the case of acting, instead, this topic of localization has instead been with the question of exploring and supporting the work of CSOs working on climate protection projects. And yes, to this end, we basically ran these 10 pilot actions over the course of 2024. I think we've talked a little bit about this already, but basically, there were 10 innovative ideas that came out of these open studios, which were based very much on the insights from different vulnerable groups to really understand the barriers for behavioral change for these groups. So the idea was that with these 10 concepts, we would test approaches for pilot action projects that would inherently be more inclusive and enable behavioral change of such groups. So in short, we basically had 8 pilot actions that linked to the acting research lines that broadly track onto the European Green Deal topics. And then we had these 2 cross-cutting ones focusing on volunteering in different ways. I'm probably not going to take the time to go through all of the pilot actions in detail, but here we have them all. So we've got, Elena from DOC is here today. Dimitra we've had on the panel from Museum Zagori. Unfortunately, our Spanish energy community partners couldn't join. Then we have IRCA looking at micro enterprises supporting Roma entrepreneurs. They're also here today. We had this project on toolkits for localizing the food to fork strategy in schools. We've got Igor from the Community Gardens in the Czech Republic. We have the active mobility in Albania, looking at trying to encourage sustainable mobility in schools. So Eden is also here. And then, yes, we've got the 2 volunteering organizations, so the kind of volunteering between the public and businesses, and then we have this one with volunteering in high schools. And unfortunately, Maria from Barcelona couldn't be here to talk about the cycling project. In terms of an overview of the implementation, I think it was really successful. All of the pilot actions implemented in many ways did everything and more of what we'd expected of them. So we said here, for instance, they proved highly successful in promoting inclusive collective action towards sustainability, and especially through this point about kind of really direct engagement with the target communities. And a lot about very effective building of platforms to provide for collaboration. So this role of CSOs as intermediaries, which I think has come up a lot today, was really important. And I think what it really shows as an overview is there are 2 levels of lessons we can learn. So first of all, we were testing this approach of localizing the Green Deal through civil society. And I think that was in many ways amazingly effective and really something that we can build on in the future. And then also I think there are a lot of practical lessons on how one does this. So the viability of the pilot action process and how one should best set up a pilot action process and support civil society organizations. So we have a whole section. All of these findings are based on the pilot action implementation report, which is available on the Acting website. Doesn't sound so exciting, but actually there's a lot of really interesting stuff in there. Yeah, and I think we have quite a lot on there in terms of, Dimitra made this point earlier that obviously funding is the elephant in the room, but we have a lot of thoughts on, even within the existing funding limits, how we can provide flexibility and dialogue to make conditions less onerous for civil society organizations which work in very different ways, maybe to the ways that big businesses and public actors are used to. Yeah, so I've tried to tailor the findings a little bit today to speak specifically about the findings that are most pertinent for this question of partnerships. So, yeah, in terms of the successes that the pilot actions really had, this kind of inclusion on the one hand and empowerment of vulnerable groups. So if we take the example of the wildfires in Greece, this approach of, I think it was really clear from the kind of reporting and analysis that the local municipalities in these villages, working in this co-creative way with local villages, unearthed all sorts of findings about local terrain and water sources and all kinds of really deep insights that were just not on their radar at all. So it's this possibility to really gain things from local communities who have this kind of embedded experiential knowledge. And then on the other hand, this question of empowerment of these groups, which isn't necessarily the same point. So I think, again, with the disaster risk management in Greece, it wasn't just learning from these groups, it was also working with them and helping them to think about what their roles would be, providing training and an understanding that if fires break out, there would be this collaboration and that everyone would understand their place in this bigger system. And I think here we can talk about the Eco Museum Zagori again, where it's really interesting that sometimes this kind of sense of identity and self-esteem is not just linked to your role in climate protection, but that, for instance, with the pastoral practices and all of the work that happened there, that there's also kind of a cultural heritage aspect to it, that communities really saw through these projects and through the involvement of universities and important actors that this is something that's not just important to them, it's actually like an important cultural heritage factor that they can take pride in. Yeah, then in terms of, there's also this really important point about translation of Green Deal policies to lived realities. So I think the pilots were a lot more successful than perhaps other actors would have been because they have these very close working relationships with existing specific target groups. So there was a lot of work in some of the pilot actions around how do we tailor climate protection and the Green Deal to make it as relevant as possible for students or for micro-entrepreneurs or different target audiences. Then we really saw this role of CSOs as mediators come through a lot. So a lot of the pilot actions started online platforms, and I think a lot of those were more successful than they'd foreseen, and I think in a lot of cases there were new plans to kind of extend them and expand them, because we saw this role of acting as a spider in the web and linking smaller, in the case of the community gardens, smaller community gardens, or like the villages in the Greek wildfires disaster, that this networking role is really important. I think here it's really important to talk about the volunteering in Serbia as one example. We had the poster earlier, and it's really interesting there that they talk about, you might have this practical, like the credibility and organizational skills, but in other cases, you also just, as an organization that's existed for a longer time, you might have the sort of financial and legal capacity to negotiate with businesses and things on behalf of volunteers, for instance. Then there was a mixed, sometimes large and sometimes not success with the institutionalization of pilot approaches. So how do we make sure that we co-create with public actors or get public actors to take on the work that we've started? And we did some speculating about what the success factors are, some of the things that we noticed. So obviously things with high public priority, so wildfires in Greece, are probably more likely to just have support inherently from political actors. Then there are these windows of opportunities. So there's also the possibility to link your project to things with higher political relevance. So we had the Food for Schools toolkit, where they very cleverly made a link between food and local food systems and resilience and adaptation, which is a much bigger topic with a lot more funding. And finally, which speaks to really the importance of supporting civil society organizations in the long term, the ones that had success working with political actors were the ones that had long-standing pre-existing relationships with politicians. I'll speed on a little bit. Yeah, so in terms of the challenges, like very often we saw issues with Elena talked about a little bit about this glass ceiling, that civil society organizations can only take projects so far and then they need public support. And often there was just this long wait and no response from especially the local authorities. In some cases, the authorities, it was clear that they didn't have the capacity or the time to do this, and other times it might just not have been prioritized. So it was primarily in municipalities, but then also sometimes with some topics like the energy communities, they needed permissions from like different levels of government, and some of those were more supportive than others. So there's sort of ramifications there for vertical governance. Yeah, and then in terms of the lessons that we've learned that are maybe not good or bad, there's definitely a need for investment in these approaches grounded in resilience and dialogue. So public authorities need to be encouraged and also supported to take a more open, co-creative approach. And I think this is especially the case in the context of resilience and adaptation projects where there's just inherent uncertainty and you need this ongoing dialogue rather than static top-down plans. Yeah, there were two clear ways that municipalities could support. So there's this like uptake and scaling, so taking over projects that have been started by CSOs and supporting them. But there was also these complementary tasks. So for instance, in Albania, they're doing all the advocacy work on cycling in schools, and then the municipality builds the network. So there's the soft stuff and the hard stuff. And finally, yeah, we also saw this point about the different kinds of civil society organizations, that some are very grassroots and embedded, and they benefit from strong trust, so they have stronger links to local groups. And then you have these kind of higher level experienced and organized network type civil society organizations that might have a different role in projects. In terms of the topics that didn't really get covered so much through the pilot actions, the private sector wasn't so involved, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. There's a lot of recommendations for local governments, but as a local government organization, I know they have a lot of constraints as well, so I'd love to hear how local governments can be supported to do this kind of collaborative partnership work more effectively. And then because this is a Horizon Green Deal project, I think it's difficult to think what exactly would be the way that the EU could best support this kind of partnerships at the very local level. I think we heard this morning that it's difficult to reach the local level from the EU. So thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. So, okay, so this is my presentation. As I said, there is a lot of work that has been done based on the pilot projects, on the research, and on the open studios that has created some, let's say, answers and some policy recommendations. And what I'm going to do in the next, hopefully 15 minutes or a little bit more, is to give you an overview what we can say is the vision of acting for moving forward on these issues. And I'm going to talk particularly about 6 of the fact sheets and the policy recommendations that we have created, and you can read, of course, all of them in our website. One focusing on indigenous and local knowledge, another one focusing on building alliances between businesses and their employees to promote Green Deal, another one focusing on civil society organizations and how they can be more inclusive and bring the inclusiveness agenda forward. The 4th one is about well-being and the notion of well-being and metrics for well-being as a driver for innovation and social innovation. There is another one about resistance. I think we heard a lot about resistance in the first panel or the second one. Yeah. In one of the panels anyway, but it's a very, very interesting concept and something that we think that we can see it in a positive way as a source of innovation. I'll talk a little bit about that. And at the end about public civil society partnerships to promote the Green Deal agenda. So acting is all about how we advocate for behavioral change and inclusion of vulnerable population in the European Green Deal. That's the main question that we worked for more than 3 years now, and there are a lot of answers. And as I said, there are 13 different faxes where we have different recommendations, but there are 3 main, let's say, elements. One is local knowledge and local action. The second is emphasize commons, and I think we spent maybe 2 hours discussing that, and everybody has a lot of ideas about that. And the last one is local level partnerships. How to introduce at the local level partnerships within government, civil society, business, and research. So first, I'm going to talk about indigenous and local knowledge. This is a knowledge that a lot of times has been excluded, whether we are talking about disaster prevention and management, whether we're talking about conservation projects. Most of them we know they are very top-down. There are plans, there are something that comes from... you cannot hear me. Okay, yes, sure, okay. They're coming from the top, from the government, or from intergovernmental organizations, and they are a lot of times are missing very useful information. I think we heard a lot about that. A lot of our pilots are about that. We need to include indigenous and local knowledge into any planning, into any dialogue. And within that, we have to talk about gender dynamics and about focusing on women, because women usually carry this knowledge. I think one of the earlier speakers talked about carrying the knowledge from the grandmother to the mother to the daughter. This is knowledge that stays local, and the women is usually those who carry it. And the indigenous and local knowledge offers very vital insights for climate resilience. So what we propose, of course, funding is an issue, provide funding and resources for indigenous knowledge-led initiatives, bottom-up instead of top-down, foster multi-generational involvement. Another issue is the issue of generations. Knowledge can be lost. We're going to move from one generation to the other, so it's very important to emphasize the multi-generational dimension, promote success stories to inspire replication, and put a lot of emphasis on capacity building, on training for both administrations and communities for mutual learning. Next one is about businesses and employee alliances. We recognize that businesses can play a very important role into moving towards the Green Deal, and the businesses can work together with the employees, but also with their supply chain and other businesses in order to promote Green Deal solutions, let's say. So what we propose are from SEERC, training. Every business is doing training to their staff, so they have to include climate action and climate change issues into their training. We're talking about energy conservation, green mobility, healthy food, disaster prevention, engaging with the community in order to work on disaster prevention plans, for example. Then every company right now has an ESG strategy or aspires to have an ESG strategy. I think it's very important that we link sustainability with the environmental social governance strategy, and also, most important, to co-create this with their employees. The employees can be a source of ideas, a source of innovation if you give them space, if we give them the room to promote things that they care as people also. So we propose to encourage innovation through incentives and rewards aligned with the ESG strategies, and embed sustainability in day-to-day operations. This can be little things like, I don't know, plastic-free cafeterias, or carpooling, or energy efficiency practices, green commuting, and so on. And promote work-life balances and inclusivity as a part of a broader ESG agenda. For businesses, it's important also to highlight that they can do it as one business, but they can do it as a cluster of businesses. because businesses, especially manufacturing and so on, are usually concentrated in the same, let's say, area, so they can pool together resources. If we can put the HR departments to work together to pool resources, for example, for carpooling or for energy communities, they cannot be done by one business, but if there are 5, 10, 15 businesses together, they can have a real impact. Now, moving towards the civil society and the role that civil society can play. Of course, this is something that it goes without saying, but what we want to emphasize is that the civil society organizations, the NGOs, they can promote climate change activity, they can promote inclusivity and so on, but they have to do it also inside their own organizations. So they have to design agendas and leadership to reflect diversity and inclusion, build solidarity, and empower local communities. So for civil society organizations, our proposal is to facilitate participatory processes with local communities, to empower vulnerable communities, and have a saying like nothing about them without them. Don't forget that we have to talk with the communities in order to be able to persuade them also. It's an issue that I raised also before, that it's not enough to try to persuade the authorities or the higher up. We have to persuade the communities, we have to persuade the people, we have to discuss. So nothing about them without them. Bridge private-public sector gaps. So the NGOs are very good, or should be very good, in moderating between the public and the private. And they can fill this gap, and they can talk to both ends, so to bring them together and have public-private initiatives that can address the climate change. And share expertise with businesses on inequality. Again, try to talk to businesses, try to understand what they can gain from this and how they can help. Okay, another issue that we talked a lot about is well-being as a driver for change. The well-being as a concept can be a metrics, can be an indicator of how you are doing certain activities and certain changes in order to promote climate change action. So healthier communities can become more resilient ones, and we can advocate into integrating well-being in policy frameworks. So some examples of this would be to subsidize sustainable food for low-income groups, to support urban gardening and community activities, to link physical activity to green transport, and to use various applications and tools to raise awareness about well-being. Resistance. As I said, we talked a lot about resistance. We have seen in our research that a lot of local communities, they are resistant, they are expressing doubts. They think that a lot of the things that the Green Deal promotes sometimes comes top-down, sometimes is more applicable to more affluent societies or to people with better means. So there is a resistance, there is a doubt, there is also misinformation that goes around. What we're saying is that resistance can also be used as a source of innovation and a source of ideas. It's hard, it needs a lot of work, it needs an understanding, it needs dialogue, but it can be a resource and not an obstacle, as we say here. So we are promoting creation of inclusive dialogue platforms, use facilitators methods like circular procedures, participatory action, turn resistance into empowerment, and also recognize silent voices. So try to ask the question, whose voice is missing? Why you don't hear anything from this part of the population, and try to communicate with them and discuss with them. And lastly, we advocate for local government civil society partnerships. This answers to the fact that there is a lot of, let's say, mistrust between government, local government, and civil society. Civil society, a lot of times, and justifiably so, they say, okay, the local government procedures, they are very complicated, they are very bureaucratic, they don't understand the needs of the community, and so on. On the other hand, the local government people, they say that civil society asks for things that are not easily implemented given the framework we have, the legal obligations, and so on and so on. So what we say is that we need to understand each other. It's very important to have a dialogue between local government and civil society, and more importantly, to have this cooperation in a strategic and systematic way. If a disaster happens, the local government usually works with civil society, works with volunteers, and so on to address the disaster. If there is an emergency, again, the same thing. But this is not systematic, this is not strategic. I think it's much better if we have a discussion between them, and then we have a systematic and strategic cooperation even when nothing happens, when there is no disaster, there is no emergency, but we know what are the capabilities of civil society, we know what the capabilities of the local government are, we know what are the needs, we can have a channel for the voices coming from bottom to up, and when something comes that needs to be addressed, then it will be much better and much easier to address. So building trust in a systematic and a strategic way is key. For a partnership between local government and civil society, the vision would be to connect global climate issues with local realities and build on community knowledge. Trust co-creation and civic space protection are vital. The approach would be, as I said, from the one hand, to create a platform of dialogue. That could be, I don't know, anything, like a permanent dialogue fora, for example, that brings them together. Invest on building skills on both ways. There are different skills that the civil society actors need to have. There are different skills that the public administration need to have. And be flexible and transparent and build a long-term relationship. The tools could be various. They have to be inclusive. They can be co-creation events, citizen assemblies, local simulations, citizen science. There are various tools, and this can be discussed and decided in each one of the partnerships. We need to use digital tools, but don't stay only on digital tools. This is something that it's a bit of a danger, because right now we are very much reliant on digital tools, and we all know how to use them, maybe, but there are a lot of communities, especially the most vulnerable ones, who don't have access to digital tools, who don't know or who cannot understand the value of digital tools. So don't trust only digital tools. Use digital and non-digital tools in order to access the needs of the vulnerable communities. Sharing local data, this is very important, especially for local government, to have open data, because the data can help everybody, from researchers to civil society organizations, to make better decisions and to program better and have better strategies. And the last thing is emphasize on sustainability. So shift from one-time collaborations to enduring partnerships. Emphasize this, what I said before, the strategic and systematic way. Embed representatives of civil society organizations and citizens in policy-making processes, and raise public awareness, encourage volunteers to foster environmental sustainability and civil participation. So this is a framework for the partnership. And with this is the last part of the recommendations that I wanted to highlight. Maybe the 4 takeaways. Behavioral change is rooted in partnership. Empower all sectors, businesses, civil society organizations, communities, and governments. Inclusivity, well-being, and local knowledge are vital. And of course, resistance is not a barrier. It can be a signpost. It can be a source of innovation. Thank you. Okay. And now to our panel. So. Okay, so the way that we're going to do that is not going to be done by presentations. We have here representatives of what I used to call the quadruple helix. So we have research, we have innovation, we have local government and civil society. I would like to give the floor to each one of you to reflect a little bit on what you heard, and then we can have some questions and some dialogue. So, I don't know, who wants to go first, or shall I give it?
Okay.
Next to me, Esteban.
Okay, first, thank you very much for remembering me and inviting me to this event, because acting is a project that I like especially. I have been part of the advisory board, and I like very much the way that you approach it in analyzing what is there, and as well to implement in practice with the 10 pilot case. So thank you very much. And I am the representative in the quadruple helix of the companies, and as you were saying, there's something that I see missing on the companies. And first, let me introduce myself, why I am the representative of the companies. Is because I am the manager of the Alicante Science Park. We have over 50 companies located there with more than 3 million of turnover and 2,000 employees. And what is common to them is that they do research and innovation. And we are trying to help them to be more competitive and to have an impact on the civil society. I am the manager only since less than 3 years, and what was astonishing for me is that the most innovative companies in the territory of Alicante were not connected with the civil society, and in particular, the University of Alicante is working for the civil society, but not with the civil society. So the quadruple helix was missing, and we are trying to develop a system with institutional change and behavioral change, as is in the panel, that maybe we succeed. We are in the process of doing that. But before going to the example, I would like to give some reflections about the importance and the relevance of the companies. First, the Green Deal, if we remember well, the Green Deal is a competitive strategy and a policy for growth of the European Union. It's not only to have better sustainability and a better future, but it's as well something that is related to the economic growth. And in that, the role of the companies has to be an important one, and we have to think carefully about that. The second thing that I would like to express is that there are things beyond corporate social responsibility. I mean, companies, Nikos was saying that, companies tend to be associated in order to provide jointly things like carpooling or other type of activities, and this is something that we should encourage. And we could let the companies and the society to do by themselves with bottom-up approaches, but I think my personal view is that in the beginning it's needed to go beyond that and to help them with the structure in order to connect, and especially if we connect with things that are far away from the daily life, for example, with the design of products or things like that. Engaging with the civil society needs proactive activities, and for that, I think we need to help them with the structure in order to facilitate the connection. And this is especially relevant in those companies that are developing projects or products for the environmental mitigation or lowering the impact of the economic activity. Normally, what the companies do is to do like in the ancient politician, do everything for society and environment, but without society. It might be incredible for you, but it's like that. And then they test in the market, and the tests are quite ridiculous. It's like a market test in the sense of knowing if the people or the customers want the thing red or yellow. We should go beyond that, and we should have better approaches in the way of co-creation and co-design of this type of product. Not only for the design thinking activities, but as well in order to have not so difficult an environmental impact. And then I come, now that I tell you the relevance and the importance of the companies, I'm going to give you an example that we are trying to implement in Alicante. And when I arrived there, the municipality of Alicante have a citizen lab, a laboratory where they ask citizens what they want in general. And most of the citizens express their vision of better environment. We don't have complex issues in Alicante, but at the end, the challenge that appear as a result of the citizen lab or the laboratory were to facilitate the employability of the people which are not, which are in different groups, which are not with difficulties to be employed. Yeah, and the second one is about circular economy. And the circular economy, what finally we found, it was something to recover the textile. The textile, or the practical approach we did is to recover the textile that are used in companies. Inside of the companies, these are technical clothes that is quite difficult to recycle because they have different components that are difficult. But what we found there is that the municipality meet with the civil society without the companies and without the people who provide solutions. Not only the companies immediately, but as well the academia. It's a typical case of quadruple helix. And then came ourselves, the science and technology part of Alicante, which had a project, a European project called COVALU, of the supported as well by Horizon Europe. And what we wanted is to introduce institutional changes in a way that forever, not during the project, we will cooperate the quadruple helix in a simple way. A simple means cheap, because we know each other and we can do whatever we want. And what we are doing is to select different challenges and practical cases established by the civil society and try to combine with the companies that we have and the researchers in order to co-create solutions. So what we do is to meet the researchers in companies and in the academia with the citizens in the territory in order to find out what could be new products and new solutions for their activities. And I'm going to tell you some examples of things that could happen and will be relevant. We have, for example, one company that is using starch. Starch is something that you eat, and they are using that for plastics, for making bag. So there could be different approaches in the civil society of using something that you can eat with the problem of hunger and so on for making an utility with this plastic bag. So these are the solutions that need to be tested with the civil society and co-created in the future. The same with the recycling plastic company that has is recycling the triple layer of the carton, like the milk cartons, so they are able to separate them and to reuse them in a very good way. And what is the approaches of doing that better and with more impact in the civil society are relevant. And the last example that I'm going to tell you that we are in the process of doing that, we have a company that is with drones is mapping all the territory in order to discover if an agriculture production has problems with the irrigation or with the fertilization or with the pest attacks. There are issues of privacy because you have a small plane in top of your head going and could have difficulties in the approaches of civil society. So the co-design of this type of things is very important for the companies. I want to finish with one thing that is quite relevant is the Green Deal is something quite important. Today is 6 months since we had the floods in Valencia. In this moment, there were a lot of rain in the mountains with almost 600 liters per square meter in just this morning. And the water was arriving to the city of Valencia and the outskirts. So a disaster could tell us that the Green Deal is important, but as well there are other things that on the daily life that we have to take into account. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Esteban, for giving us the option of the enterprises and a lot of thought that we can give to that. I'll come back with some questions, but I want to give the floor to Laura now.
Before I share more, I actually want to invite you all just to be really present in the whole group that we are. Because right now, in this moment, in this room, we are the living network of people and intelligence that's gathered here. So I want you to just take a moment to feel the whole group and yourself in it. And also, as you're listening, to not just listen to my words or think about them in your mind, but to connect to me and to the source of where this is actually coming from. This doesn't need to make much sense. It's in a way an experiment to see. Because one of the things when it comes to collaboration and partnerships, it's always about people, it's about living beings, it's about connection. And we've already heard quite a lot also in the 2 presentations. And one of the things that stands out for me and from the different experiences working in a very diverse network of many kinds of different community-led initiatives is that there's quite a big difference in mindset and culture about how we work, what we value, what we think, about approaches. So it's not just about what we do, but how we do it. And it's not just about what we say, but what we do. I think in this time it's more and more essential to step into the actions, into the embodiment, into the reality that we want to co-create. And I feel that is very much at the heart of the real potential in collaboration and partnerships. And to take a more systemic or even ecosystemic approach that involves the different actors and sectors that have been touched here and are represented in this panel, but brings them together in a new way. And for example, when it comes to government and the private sector companies, what I think about is I think about power and I think about resources. Right? These are 2 things that are very strongly held and managed by these sectors. And then the question is like, can we be, and that can come from companies, that can come from government, that can come from community initiatives, can we be catalysts and enablers to distribute resources and power in a new way? Otherwise, we're not going to really change anything in a real way. So I think it's an interesting question to ask, does the kind of action, the partnership, create more autonomy in a community or dependence? Does it distribute power, or does it just shift it or even keep it in a particular way? Is the community, once the action is finished, and it stops, is the community actually weaker after or stronger? And especially also with this focus of acting on vulnerable communities, marginalized communities, I think these questions are really essential. And if we don't attempt and challenge ourselves and open up to more radical change, these conditions that create the inequalities, that create the vulnerabilities, are going to stay the same. So I think this is an invitation for more radical change and shifts in our societies. And from the work in ECOLISE, where we work on a European level with many different kinds of local regenerative community initiatives, there's a few things that show up quite clearly as patterns. And one of them, for example, and we've touched on this today, is related to governance. You can have beautiful community initiatives, you want to create change, and then there's a point where your voice is not really heard and reflected in the decisions, where there's maybe a lack of trust or a lack of bidirectional communication with the local government. So there's certainly one pattern all around governance, and that can be also a real leverage point for more radical and transformative change. If we want to create collaborations and partnerships where we're working together on a just and eco-social transition, this is one of the leverage points that we can really focus on. And if we distribute and decentralize power, if we involve people in decision making, if we build trust, if we establish functional, multi-directional flows of communication, this is one of the areas that can really create a big change. To not just be powerful, but power flow, to distribute it, and to also step back from some of the mindsets and cultural patterns that have really shaped our societies and civilizations today. For example, around control. There's a lot of that. We've talked about bureaucracies, about all the things that you maybe need to do. There's control embedded in all of this. And so it's another approach. What if it's about the art of losing control? What if that would be the best political strategy for these times? Not to have more control, but to have less control. And this also comes from some understanding of more regenerative development approaches, where we can see it's not about adding things into the system. It's actually about removing the blocks for living systems to really thrive. So what if we would take that and apply it in our social and political systems? How would that look like? Another area, of course, that's also very related to my work as a network weaver are networks themselves. It's also very clear from all the experience that it's not just about islands and local groups trying to be self-sufficient and manage everything on their own. That also doesn't work. So it's very clear that we need translocal initiatives, that we need collaboration, that we need partnerships and networks. And this is a new way of organizing. We have the internet now for a few decades, but I feel socially we're still learning how to organize and operate as networks. There's a lot of inspiration we can take from ecosystems to develop more also as a humanity, as an ecosystem network. And there's a lot of opportunities there to change different dynamics and to create knowledge sharing, to create a kind of distribution of nutrients, of resources, of care all around in a very natural and organic way. So it really flows where it's most needed. And it can respond and stay adaptive and dynamic. So a network is never a fixed structure. It's alive, it changes, and I think this is one of the things that we need in these times. There's nothing fixed. There's not one plan. We need like thousands or maybe millions of experiments and innovations and different adaptive approaches that are not like one main plan. So I think that's also very clear. And through that comes a lot of potential for localization and for a shift in our, what I said, like economic and political systems. Because this is, I feel, if I go more to the root cause, this is what's really needed to have then better partnerships. As long as these systems stay the same and power and resource distributions stay the same, we'll only reach like a quite shallow level of transformation. And it's not gonna go deeper into the roots.
Yes, thanks Nikos for giving me the opportunity to participate in this discussion, in this panel today. However, I think that I have to highlight that I cannot have the ambition nor the capacities in the perspective of a quadruple helix perspective that has been proposed by Nikos, I cannot have the ambition or the capacity to represent the research world here in this panel for many reasons. First of all, we, Knowledge and Innovation, we are absolutely a research institution, not academic, but anyway a research institution. The world of research is so complex, made of so many differentiated actors that I cannot pretend to represent anyone beyond my organization. And also because Knowledge and Innovation is a research center where we had the opportunity in the past, we have the opportunity presently to analyze, to study a lot of examples of partnership, and this is the reason because perhaps I can tell something, but we are not member of partnership in coalition between civil society, private sector, perhaps yes in some Horizon Europe project, but not beyond this. So my role is quite different. Yes, if I can say something, is because we had the opportunity many times to have among what we studied in our research experience partnerships. And the first thing that came me in mind, also on the basis of the fact sheets that have been presented by Nikos, that has been elaborated in the acting project, and also beyond the fact sheets based on the previous experience of research on partnership, is the word complexity. Complexity because, as it has been underlined also by Nikos in the presentation, but also in the presentation among the 10 pilot action, because first of all, yes, we all agree that there is a fecundity, a very strong usefulness of partnership among civil society organization, research, local authorities, and private sector. But many problems have been underlined. One of the fact sheet is on resistances. It's clear that we deal with resistances, explaining that resistance should be seen also as an opportunity. But first of all, there are resistances. So resistances to an alliance, resistance to a partnership with other actors, in particular with government of local authorities. Daniel, in his presentation, underlined how much the different pilot action have been very good example, contain very good example of partnership, but mainly between civil society organization and local authority, without the presence of private sector. Perhaps in the research line number 4, there was the private sector, the one of micro-entrepreneurs that are private sector per essence. But in many cases, there were not private sector. In the last fact sheet, the one specifically on that has been presented by Nikos among the cooperation between local authority and civil society organization, it has been underlined that there are many issues in this kind of partnership. Nikos said that it's very often there are strong cooperation in emergency, cooperation in the management of disaster, but in the normal time there is not so much cooperation in many cases. So it is problematic also from this point of view. And a little parenthesis here, I can give an example of another research that I am doing presently in another Horizon Europe project. The name is Cross EU, that is related on socio-economic impacts of adaptation and mitigation policies. Now there is a very interesting project in the provincial autonomy, provincial of South Tyrol, in which they are working to construct a relation with voluntarism in time of peace. They said we have a strong relation with voluntarism in time of emergency that is very, very problematic, and probably is problematic because we haven't constructed a partnership relation in time of peace, where there is no disaster, there is not an emergency. But going back for adding other elements of complexity is also because when we speak about civil society, among civil society there is everything. Among NGOs there is everything. There is good NGOs. The idea that all the NGOs, all the CSOs are good is a wrong idea, with my deep respect with all the NGOs, because there are terrible NGOs, terrible CSO. Local authority, there is everything. Private sector, there is everything. So we speak about some example of actors that are very, 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 very heterogeneous. And also inside the same actor, we can find everything. So perhaps what could be also an issue that should be taken into cooperation, to take into account, that perhaps what we need is a cooperation among agents of change that we can find everywhere. We can find agents of change in CSO, we can find agents of change in local authority, in private sector, in research organization, and perhaps is among these agents of change that first of all should be identified, that it could be easier to build a cooperation. Another issue that came in mind, based on what has been presented before, a concept what was introduced is CSOs as mediator between the reality and disadvantaged people. It is absolutely true. In many cases, CSOs can play this role. But extending the notion, according to me, what is important to have in mind that all these kind of factors that we pretend to put in a partnership are their own vision, their own goals, their own program of activity, their own approach, etc., etc. So what is very important is to try to understand in which way it is possible to negotiate among these different points of view, among these different perspectives, among these different views. And based on negotiation, that is a concept not so far from mediation, it is perhaps easier to start to think about partnership and start to understand in which way it will be possible to build partnership. So my concern is that we have to go beyond what could be, a certain sense, a very good idea. Yes, partnership among this kind of actors of the quadruple helix are very important. Totally agree. But if we don't take into account these issues that have been also well underlined in the different fact sheets that have been prepared by Acting, we risk to do a declaration, but not to be able to go from the declaration to action.
Thanks. I believe I have to speak in the role of the city officer, and so different from what I heard this morning and even in this panel. And but I bring some insights and my experience that comes from 20 years in an NGO. So what I will say now about how to increase collaboration and partnership comes from this experience. And what I believe is that, as you were saying, it's very complicated. You have different NGOs, different city, political cities and city officers, and you have to deal with this. But what you should try to define is, say, a common ground where everyone can find their interest, because for cities, for administration, there is an interest in the collaboration with CSOs. And because we are not structured, we don't have the resources to reach some results in terms of people support and people involvement, and even understanding the changes in the society, not only if you work with the society you can gain. And I believe this comes from a complicated, long process of discussion, even resistance from both sides, because on both sides you have resistance. And, but I believe this is the key to reach those goals. And even because we, say, in many situations we share the same vision. We want to reach the same goals. And obviously in the differences of roles. And this, I think, it's very important, even in the discussion that you have to build between public administration and CSOs and NGOs. And so how you build this kind of collaboration? First, among the differences, the difference of role, that must be clear. And in understanding that you have different skills that you can bring on board, and on clear targets and results that you want to achieve. And obviously, on the side of CSOs, what you ask from public administration is you want from answers, you want in many cases, obviously, even resources, you want permitting, you want things that are fast, and maybe many times are not prepared. On the other side, what you ask to civil society is, let's say, is the credibility, the capacity to speak to people, to bring on board even part of the society with which public administration, because of how slow it is and how it's made on silos, have difficulties in reaching. And obviously you must build a trust between these two sides. And this comes from obviously taking a responsibility of what you do. And you must work on this in a transparent way, on the differences. And in my experience, you must be clear on all of this, because at a certain point you must understand what is needed on both sides. Like what we experienced in the work that we have done these 3 years with this new, let's say, government at Rome's level, is that you even need new tools. Because if you want to create new collaboration, like on energy communities, on community gardens that have been abandoned, and like we'll work a lot on small urban agriculture plots, on abandoned buildings, on many pieces of the city where you need to bring on board civil society. And many times in the past, it's thanks to civil society that those areas, say, people have the possibility to go there, that they are not being abandoned, and it's because of their role. And so you need to understand how to work together. And many times you need to find new tools. So we lost a lot of time on this because we had to approve new regulation, even to understand the different role. You take care of a place, but you have the responsibility of that place. You need resources, but at the same time, there are some rules. And like in the work that we are doing now on energy communities, one thing that we understood in trying to work together is that we were asking for, say, social results in terms of not only putting together people in terms of creating an energy community, a new solar plant, and sharing that energy, but even to bring on board say the answer to energy poverty or social issues in that community. And through this, say, discussion, time, patience, we understood that the thing that they needed more from us was surfaces for solar plants, because we are a big city, dense, and with certain problems of finding surfaces to put solar plants on. So we did a long process of debate, and at a certain point we understood that we had to define a regulation, a permitting process for having solar plants for energy communities made by civil society on our roofs. But let's say in a clear differences of roles. We were not inside those energy communities, but we defined what were the targets, the public targets, what the public interest. And through this process, we understood at the same time we couldn't go through, before someone spoke about the US model, the business model, through a typical business model, because at that point, a utility would have gained everything. So we had to define a different process for only NGOs and CSOs with some characteristics. And so we defined a new process only for them. Obviously, complicated because we had to do something new, but at the same time, with this way, we had the opportunity to define a process of co-creation, co-design, and at that point, they come with a project to say to the public. Say in this case, we even differentiated. Rome is very big in different areas because you can't do all at the center, and even to understand which are the best project. And through this co-design and co-creation project, to understand if those projects are in line with our targets of public interest. So at that point, we give them our roofs. That is something obviously that is not normal because we could have put solar plants for us on those roofs. But this is an example of how you have to create new tools, because we did this even for gardens or buildings that were abandoned when you put civil society on board on these small urban agricultural plots. This is an example of the kind of, let's say, work that you have to do in the difference of roles and with the patience needed, because you have to define something new. If you want to have a more, let's say, engaged society with people that, let's say, want to bet on the future of that community, of the city, you need even to find something new, and even on the city side, you must change. And obviously, there is even the responsibility on the NGO side to change, because they must take more responsibility than probably they would have imagined before.
Thank you very much, Edoardo. I think this is very, very useful, and talking about the tools that you need to build, the new regulations, and all this. I mean, listening to this, I get the idea that two things missing. One is resources, the other is the tools or the governance and so on. And by listening to this, I think that the second one is even more important and more difficult than the resources themselves. So, well, I have here some questions, but I think it's better to give the floor to the audience to see if there are any questions from the audience, and then we can come back. Marina.
Sì. I wanted to ask to Edoardo Zanchini about this division of roles, because I understand that also to, maintain also the autonomy of the civil society sector. And you mentioned several times, and so we defined the public interest, and then, so like that was something that was on the part of the city. And on the other hand, you several times also mentioned, and then we engage in this process. Then I also been to some of the initiatives where these things were discussed, and they didn't seem a lot to be very top down. So then you said also we engage in this co-design, co-creation process. So I wanted to ask you what you meant when saying, okay, we define the public interest, how this is negotiated with citizens, and what are the outcomes of this?
Thanks. I was talking about this new tool regulation that we created for energy communities, but at the same time, a city must involve citizens in all the decisions that are related to the changes that are ongoing in the city. And like my job is to work on adaptation and mitigation. And so you gain, say, the trust from people, and they feel part of a process if they know what is happening, if you have a long and complicated process at all levels. So we worked on the adaptation strategy with a long process of engagement, but even on engaging not only CSOs, but even universities and research centers, because, let's say, at least in Italy, let's say, local administration and parties don't have a lot of trust from people. We must say this. So we have to even to gain this trust. And this happens only if you bring everyone on the table in the different roles, because that is even a different role from CSOs, like the independent research institutes and universities. But in this way, you at least create the conditions to have a debate on the priorities, and not only on what is happening on the web and on social media. And so you share what are the priorities and what you believe at city are the priorities. And then you go to a different step, that is the one where you involve people on decisions with huge resistance, because obviously in a city like Rome, we had really a strong opposition, because many times they told us, you are not coherent, you are doing different things that are the opposite of what you are saying, because maybe of decision taken in the past or contradiction that you have in some regulations. So it's always complicated. But at the same time, when you really are coherent, like the work that we are trying to do on energy communities, you have to change ideas. Like we had an idea at the beginning, but when you discuss with civil society, you understand that your role, even the role of the public administration, because at least in Italy, the debate that was at the beginning on energy communities, on the European directive, was a strong role of the cities, of the municipalities. We believe it's not our role. Our role must not be central, because everyone has to do solar, energy communities, and the part that we have in this process is very important in terms of permitting, helping, resources, but at the same time, we must not be at the center of a process where you have to involve citizens in the communities. We must, in some way, define what is the public interest that is in our side. And through this process, we understood that we even needed to become part of this process, but not being part of that energy community where 100 people are there, maybe one school, one local organization, one CSO, and one NGO or a foundation that maybe works with people or kids that suffer some kind of social problem or health problem. We must not be there, because they have to define what is the target for that community. But at the same time, we are important because we can help the process. And what we understood was that we could help the process with our roofs, because they didn't have the roofs, or helping in finding the resources, but not through our budget, but through maybe private investments or private companies, going back to one question. And this way we understood how to define this new regulation that we defined after a long participatory process. And now we are inside this process. Now we are inside the first proposal for asking for surfaces, for our surfaces, maybe for schools, maybe our schools, or maybe our buildings where we have offices, to create an energy community. But we have to define what are our targets in that community. Like, we want to plant trees, or we want something that has a social benefit. On the other side, you have a proposal that comes from a CSO or an NGO or a group, a new energy community that maybe has different ideas. Then you go through this co-design and co-creation process, and maybe you can reach even a different result. But I think this is very interesting, because it, say, in the different role, can bring to a result that is interesting in terms of involvement of people. As we were saying before, speaking with Gabriele, in the energy community process in Italy, it's very complicated, like everything in Italy. It's very slow, but it's very interesting from a social point of view, because many people are involved, and maybe for the first time they feel that they are involved in something that is inside an important issue, contemporary issue, is very scaring issue, but at the same time they can be part of something that is in their community. Plus, it can even gain some result, because what we ask is that if you ask for our roof, is the money that comes from that energy community must go to a social project in that community. So you're not gaining for yourself. You are part of a social project. And obviously this is complicated. Not everyone wants to be part of it. But we know that there are some association organizations that could even find resources for projects that they have, maybe for planting trees or for a social issue that can find a result. So it's very complicated. We haven't gained a result yet, but I believe it's at least a direction that is transparent and everyone understands the role that they have to play.
Thank you. Hi, sir.
Thank you for this very inspiring panel. So I would like to ask a question to Laura. You picked the microphone. First of all, thank you for inviting all of us to being more present here, and also for integrating more presence, embodied presence here and in your work. I would love to hear how that works, and if you can give some examples of how you invite your partners into that space of presence and translocal connections and beyond. And what you see as some of the better stories emerging from such partnerships, even if not for radical change yet. What kind of transformative change do you observe, have you observed in your work, your partnership with local communities across? And I come from an experience of working with activists in Turkey. We have a community that we call transformative activism. And this is exactly what we've been doing as well. So I know the kind of transformative change that is possible. And I really appreciated you bringing that perspective here. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. There's always a lot that comes from engagement, no? So I love questions. I'm very curious myself. And it gives a good chance to explore some topics more deeply. I think it's basically two questions that you've asked. So the first one, I think the part about really embodying values and things that really matter to us is essential. So for me, like inner and outer change, they can't really be separated. And this is, and I think in the work as ECOLISE, we have a lot of community-led initiatives that are kind of agents of change, as you maybe called it, or pioneers that have done things that, even today or maybe some years ago seemed really strange, very different, out of the norm, out of what's common in society. And it's a real opportunity to innovate on the edges. Is often in rural settings, in marginalized settings, in small scales, is kind of invisible. Nobody sees it, which can feel like a disadvantage, but it's also a real opportunity to experiment and do something that is not controlled, that's not easily forbidden. And I feel this is also a huge role that agents of change, especially in civil society and communities, can take. Is we're a lot more free. We can do things that other actors have a challenge to do. And this includes also embodying values or bringing in new practices, new behaviors, and just doing it. And having enough courage, doing it together. I think this is also something that was shared here earlier. It's not, I think we're beyond the era of individualism. I know we can still see it, but this is not like, it already passed its peak. So for me, it's very clear. And the next era is a lot more collective and communal and collaborative, very clear. So I think it's about bringing this into real life, into all the groups, all the relationships, all the connections. And I feel this has been also in my own journey, being part of different community initiatives and networks for the past 15 years, continues to transform me too. And I feel this is where we can really see how change actually happens real life. And in partnership and different collaborations, it's connecting with people and what they need or care about. So this has a lot to do with communication. And I think we've had it a little bit here, but I think it's in partnerships that's really essential. And finding different ways to communicate, even if it's the same thing. And a friend of mine was really creative about that. He was running a lot of tree planting actions. And when he was talking to environmentalists, it was about biodiversity, right? And restoring nature. When he was talking to churches, it was about creation. And then we can be a part to make the creation of God more beautiful. When he was talking to schools, it was about, for the kids to learn something and have like experiential learning experiences. When he was talking to more conservative people or even from the far right, it was about the cultural heritage. Or a family tree, and it was the same thing, communicated very differently. So I think there's huge creativity and potential there, and there's also the potential to not adapt and stay inside old ways of behavior, not be afraid to be very different. So that's, I feel, another thing, because really I think we can be much more of a catalyst for change if we're coming from some other place, actually. If we're not stuck inside of the same problems that we're trying to resolve. So that's another point where we're literally like taking ourselves into a different position to have a different influence. Okay, so maybe a long answer, but I hope helpful. And on the second part of maybe some more concrete examples of how this can happen, I think first of all, what's really essential in my work and what I'm trying to bring through ECOLISE and our network, because we're a network of over almost 60 different organizations that are either networks or CSOs that represent and work with different sustainable community initiatives that work on environmental and climate issues and that are quite diverse and spread out over many different countries, and embedding a network collaborative approach into everything that we do. That participation is in everything that we do. And I feel this is essential, and this also speaks to this topic of the panel, and that it's not just one approach or something we sometimes do, but it is actually infiltrates and becomes just part of the fabric for everything. So it's not a question, do we do participation or not? it's embedded into it. It becomes like the new basis. So this is part of the work that we're doing with ECOLISE as well, and bringing it into all of the works. For example, with one of the projects I've been coordinating, where we've been working with 50 local community projects across 11 countries, working on different environmental issues. Some of them work on energy and energy communities. Some of them work on circular economy, which we had as a topic. Some work on water and water cycles. Some work on biodiversity, nature, food topics. So it's quite diverse. And we've involved 20 of our members to collaborate with us in this project. We've brought up a consortium of partners together and also our networks. We're bringing in people who can support. We've also had this, like, what kind of tools, skills, capacities do we need? So we brought in from our network people who have a lot of experience in participation, in community development, in group facilitation, in mediation, to empower and support the project. So they are accompanying all of them. So there's, again, this supports. And what we've seen from that is that each of the community project, they've had some goals. They have very different approaches and solutions because their context is very different. So again, this part, like, there's not one solution. And then we've tried to be, as much as we can, like, flexible and adaptive in the support and in the collaboration as well. And what we've seen is that the coherence inside of each community has been a huge influencing factor on what they could establish. So that's a lot of the connections and relationship inside the group. But what we've also seen is that quite naturally all of them have a bigger influence beyond what they've set out to do. And I think this is an interesting aspect also about if we're thinking about a local implementation of green deals, what is really effective. If we can support that as kind of catalysts on a local level, it actually has a much more wider impact into society. And this is what we've also seen. And this starts to establish from that level of communities, of local realities, of the innovation that they bring, different networks and partnerships and opportunities that weren't there before.
I think we have run out of time, but if there is one more last question, we can, yeah. Last question. Sorry, Colette, I think we can have 3 minutes more.
My question is for Edoardo Zanchini. So I thought it was quite interesting, this focus on energy communities and solidarity energy communities. I was particularly captured by the detail that you provided us, saying that the municipality is working as a bridge between the promoters of the energy communities and maybe private companies that could support them. And this is a key aspect for energy communities that have that try to involve disadvantaged citizens, because often these citizens don't have the means to invest in solar panels, so they might struggle with the finances. So I was wondering how this work in practice happens. How do you liaise with these private companies, and what are the motives of these private companies to participate in these projects?
Edoardo, if we can have a quick answer, because they're going to kill me.
And as he's Italian, we will probably, you speak Italian. Yeah, maybe we can continue later. And okay, fast. What we are trying to do is first to create, let's say, a common ground now of discussion on energy community in Rome. So there is a platform where they're involved these social energy communities, because we are working only on those side of the communities. If you have a private energy communities with a utility, that is, we're not interested. They don't need help from us. We are interested in the one that have, let's say, a social target, a social environmental target. And the difficulty that they had, the first one I already explained on surfaces. The other one was, how do you get the money to start a new project? So there are two possibilities. Or you find money from big companies, even utilities, that have a corporate social responsibility. They want to put money on this kind of projects. And we are now working on we already have one energy community that was made this way. They gave money to that project, and we only give the surfaces of a roof of our building, and with those kind of with that kind of project. And now another one is in a complicated neighborhood of Rome, where we have obviously some social target that we want to take care on. The other side is how to put banks inside this kind of project. Banks are always interested in energy projects. They are not interested if you involve people with energy poverty, communities that are new organization, association, where who puts a guarantee for the money that you that you ask for. And so we are trying to work on this, on the dimension of the projects, the guarantees. It's not easy, but we are trying to speak with some of these banks and to bring them inside these projects. Obviously, there is always, let's say, a project at a time. Every project has a story, a different kind of guarantee, and even a different kind of return. But this is the kind of role that we are trying to play. And the mayor is in charge of climate. And so I work for the mayor, and the office that was created, and working with all the offices to overcome the problem of working inside an administration with silos, because obviously you have different offices. We are trying to overcome it with this kind of organization.
Okay, thank you very much, and apologies for taking a little bit longer. Thank you very much, everybody.